life away on, with Andrew Reed and the Liberation. It's a serious question, one worth pondering. Am I living the life I want, an intelligent life, or something else? How can I have a better experience of life? These are some of the questions explored in this series of messages without the brag and the advertisement, getting beyond even human institutions and society, into the wilderness, nature, the reality of how life actually operates on this planet. These messages range from intimate recordings from the awakened forest to concerts, national conferences, and broadcasts on a wide array of philosophical topics.
Okay, here is a message on compensation, and I think it provides a lot of insight into life itself, as really you could say that all of life is compensation. Whether it's financial, and a lot of times we confine it just to that domain, but it also is the experience of life. And so for this, what are you willing to throw your life away on podcast? Having a great grasp of what compensation is can make a huge impact of how you interpret life and thus how you experience life. And it has a lot to do with what? The reconciliation of both the positive and the negative. And of course, we go away from the negative, but it explores it fairly profoundly. So enjoy. This morning, I would like to speak directly about a topic that's very important to me. And if we're thinking about this world, it's important to you as well. And that's the topic of compensation. Compensation is such a deep and profound topic that we have to go into the rich philosophical explanations of why we're doing it and what its purpose is. If someone wants a good baseline for reading to really get started, just to get yourself in the groove of what compensation is really all about, I would suggest Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay on compensation. I think it's 23 or 26 pages, very short, but it really explains compensation in so many of its forms that we normally don't think of, as we're hypnotized by society, that compensation is simply your paycheck, and it only has a carrot, an upside, and it doesn't go in reverse. And me, as a teacher in this setting, I will overemphasize the negative or the disincentive aspects of compensation. Why? To compensate for the over-exaggeration in society, to help mature people into true professionals, where people can really learn to enjoy their lives. I want to speak directly in plain language, which is so often not the case, without an audience to have to impress. Though I try not to impress audiences, I realize I have to keep them entertained. But just to lay it out there the way it is, because that's really all I'm interested in, is the way it is. Not interested in talking about things in academic terms or in theories about the way this world operates, but the truth, reality, what is. And so compensation, huge topic, in that we live in a world of incentives and disincentives. We're moving towards something or away from something. The human being acting like the amoeba, the single-celled organism. And whether it's on an individual level or an organizational level, of course, I'm talking very much on an organizational level, but obviously it can be applied to the individual. The same principles are true in all these situations. I'm not one to quote other people very much because I feel like if we have merit to what we do, it should stand on its own. But I will here. Charlie Munger, again, Warren Buffett's sidekick in Berkshire Hathaway. And he had this to say about compensation or incentives. Show me the incentive and I'll show you the result. And so many of our issues and frustrations in running our respective enterprises can be solved by addressing compensation. Compensation is a structural move. It is a system solution rather than a people solution, though obviously they work together. And the thing about all of this is that, again, virtually all of our frustrations and problems can be solved through our compensation systems. How? Well, if you need something to happen, provide the incentive. If you don't want something to happen, provide a disincentive, but do both. And so the intelligent among us will take a look at, a world of incentives as well as disincentives. And of course, the disincentive aspect is what people want to not address. They want to just put carrots and gold and everything in front of people, thinking that that will do the job, but it will not do the complete job. It will do half of the job. Because of the other side, the negative side, the ashes, the hurt, the pain part, the other half of life has to be engaged to get the full benefit. Because we're running from things or going away from things, negative, pain, all that, just as much as we're going towards something positive, a vision, some type of achievement, gain. So both need to be employed. And a lot of people miss that. It also explains why accountability is done so poorly in so many organizations, where if you go to any world-class organization, whether it's Toyota, John Deere, Multiview, Pal Sudden Service, National Healthcare, any of these world-class award-winning companies, you will find high accountability cultures where people's work is meaningful. And if people don't do their jobs, they feel the pain. And so many people are so squishy and weenie about that. And your compensation system is something that can be devised that it does the heavy lifting for you. It does a great amount of the accountability for you because, again, it is structural. And as I talk about this, even though we're very much known in the healthcare circles, I'm going to speak to this really of how these patterns of success or these best-known success patterns or practices can be applied more broadly to agriculture, to retail, to all different business sectors. And we'll start out with the statement that all human beings and all forms of life, in fact, seek a payoff in all situations. Now, think about this. A lot of us have illusions that we're sacrificing for our children, for example. Well, if we want to get honest with ourselves about it, we're really choosing among a wide array of options. We can choose to, through neglect even, to let our kids run wild. Do whatever you want. Or we can actually try to raise them. Okay, so those are options, right? And normally it feels better to try to make that good attempt to raise your children, to get them to clean their rooms, to be responsible, right? Okay, so the point is we're making choices and we're moving in those directions that we believe are going to get a payoff. Okay, volunteers. Okay, in our hospice work, it's mandated by Medicare that at least 5% of the care is done from the community by volunteers, which is a marvelous thing to have as far as getting healthcare really integrated into a community. Well, these volunteers, why are they volunteering? Well, obviously they're looking for karma, spiritual merit, feeling good, giving back, all these things. They're not doing it for no purpose. They've probably been touched by excellent care. And if they've been doing the perfect visit with perfect phone interactions, which we have taught for a few decades of how to just get meticulous and truly considerate about the patient and family and what they're experiencing in this most vulnerable time. People feel that, and maybe they've been impacted and touched by that, and they want to give back. And they will stop volunteering when they feel that their work is not significant, that it has no meaning. So in the case of the volunteer, meaning, purpose is probably the big payoff. But all forms of life are working like this. Even those incarcerated for heinous crimes, they were seeking a payoff. Maybe it was revenge. Maybe it was to get their name in the paper. But they were doing it for some reason. May not be that bright. So all life is compensation. It's almost electromagnetic, just like we have two poles of the earth. We have the north and south. We have a spinning thing that goes on. We have two ends of a magnet, and you can cut off the negative end of the magnet, and guess what? It reappears automatically. And life is like that. And as I talk about compensation here, I'm going to start out with the deep philosophical points, because this deep, rich philosophical understanding behind the reasons we would go into this compensation direction for our respective organizations, if we do not have that deep understanding, best known success patterns or practices will go away. They will evaporate over time as lower consciousness, lower intelligence comes into the organization via turnover, or we get bored with the practices that we're using that are giving us our success right now. So much success is dissipated away just by people that are bored, new people to the organization that didn't know how the organization was built in the past. And so they changed the logos, they changed the look, they changed all these things that have endeared people ignorantly because they lack the deep philosophical understanding or connection with the purpose of why we are doing this. The lowest form of teaching is telling people to do things rather than explaining the why behind the action. Thus, it goes into, again, the other area of Multiview's extreme success has been people development. And how do people learn? And what do the most elite organizations, as well as the best teachers that have ever walked on earth, what have they done to achieve these results? And with this, let's go through some of these points. And it will be quite extensive. Human beings seek meaning above money. Andrew, how can you say that? Well, you can pay people piles of money and they will leave the organization if they feel their work is not purposeful or meaningful. Well, I'll use this example as a Depression era example where obviously Roosevelt was putting in all these work programs. And so they had this flood of money and they said to the men, dig these ditches. And of course they think they're putting in a pipeline or something like that. So they're digging like crazy. They're being paid a good wage. And then at the end of the project, they say, well, let's fill it back in. Because they really didn't have any plan. They were just giving people jobs. And so after digging holes, big holes, and then filling them in, digging holes, filling them in, gradually people started to quit. Well, why was this? Because there's no point in this. They could not retain employees that were getting a good paycheck but doing meaningless work. A human being seems to have something inside of us that we need to have a vision for our lives. We need to have a bright horizon. We need to be going towards something, working towards something. And even in my own life, I've had organizations that have paid me these really huge amounts of money where I may have participated through Multiview of turning that organization around, taking it from bankrupt to putting away $30, $100 million in the bank in fairly short order because, let's face it, best known success patterns work wherever they're applied. But then they get bored, and it's like, well, let's start doing a bunch of research. Let's start doing this. And so the crazy element comes in, and people find themselves really just going in different directions. And I'm still in the letterhead, and I'm going, we're not really using our stuff the way we used to. Our margins are going down. Our quality is going down. Anytime you start to go in many directions, your focus is dissipated. Thus, your quality is dissipated. And that's just the way it is. Human beings can only keep a couple variables in mind at one time. So after a while, I'm going, what's my purpose here? It doesn't really represent our brand. So I quit. This leads us back to human beings seek meaning and purpose over money. Now, with this said, when we're attracting talent, we're attracting people into our organizations, a lot of times it's the shiny coin that draws them in, right? They see it, oh, that's a great salary, that would be good for my life. But yet then they get in and they find out that the work environment is bad, the leader or manager that they're working with or for in a less consciousness organization is crappy. And they realize that their life is being fitted away moment by moment at a place or at work they don't like, even though they're getting the big check, and so they quit. And then another point along this line is that no matter how much you pay people, if your culture is bad or poor, you'll lose them. That's probably the defining point there. So, at minimum, there's two forms of compensation, really, in any organization. There's financial compensation, which is what we normally think of when we think of compensation. And then there's the work atmosphere, or job compensation. So two distinct things, one more of a psychic nature, the other of tangible, paid in money, which represents what economic energy or capacity. But at least two forms, and there's probably more. But those 2 points will keep us in mind. But that environment aspect is huge. Another point about compensation is that we live in a transactional world. Obviously, I live in nature. If you've listened to any of my messages, it is a transactional world. It's a world of cause and effect. It has a big equal sign there in that there's almost a mathematical equation in life that if we want the heat, we have to put wood in the stove. If baby birds are going to get fed, mama bird has to go out and get the worm. Thus, again, it's this world of action, consequence, action, consequence. Again, that doesn't explain the entirety of the world, because if that was the case, there would be no accountability. We could blame every result that we have on the past and say, of course I'm alcoholic because I was locked in a closet once, or because my parents drank, or whatever. Whereas the other half of the equation is the human will. And so I think both of those have to be balanced, cause and effect and will. But this transactional aspect of life where there's almost an accounting system of debits and credits, something that offsets. Obviously, there's all kinds of literature as well as spiritual books that talk about that. I'll use some biblical examples here. To him that giveth, more will be given unto him. He that has not, even that will be taken away. Seek and ye shall find. So action, result, knock and the door will be opened. If that will not work, thou shalt not eat. What you sow, so shall you reap. Okay, so there's a lot of cause and effect, action, reaction. And of course, compensation fits directly into that. That if we want more compensation, and most people do, that we've got to do something for that. And I'll just say this, we injure people if we pay people too much or give things away for free. Free really doesn't exist. Everything's coming out of someone's pockets. It's coming from some extraction someplace, right? It's like the government and taxes. Well, that comes from us, right? So they are the stewards of our money, and it's questionable sometimes how good a job they're doing of managing that. It's very easy to spend other people's money. So this idea of free cause and effect, one idea that's probably difficult for people to get their minds around, especially if they're addicted to modern society and the news, is that the world is a self-balancing system. It is a just system. This planet will not allow one species to overpopulate before that species starts to die off. It will not allow anything to become so lopsided that it can remain and just keep going. No, there's some type of counterforce that is just in the DNA of the world that will self-correct, self-balance, bring things back into alignment, and thus it's a fair world. You tax the people too much, the people revolt. You give the people too much freedom, the people are wild, and crazy things go on. So there's always a balance going on really all levels of life. Now, regarding this transactional nature of life, the shrewd businessman, or fool, you might say, makes these attempts at halfness, to grind people down to the best deal, down to the nub, almost from a very needy place, or maybe even a place of gamesmanship on some level. But I find that when people are not gracious, that are always trying to grind people down to the bone to get the very best deal, and now I'm not faulting getting great deals, but this attempt at halfness brings people to a place of distrust, where once you start to think and communicate in halfness, their eyes no longer meet yours. They have some type of almost hate churning or brewing up within them, that they can feel that there's not equity and a sense of fair play within you. And I find that good business, long-term business, and Multiview is set up around long-term good business, dedicated to intelligence, helpfulness, and goodness. That you want to set up relationships where all parties are winning or benefiting from the relationship, which involves sometimes some compromises, not regarding your quality or anything like that, but where the rewards or the compensation are deemed as good on both sides, rather than grinding people down, knowing that the other side is going to take a hit for your benefit. And what is the real joy in that, unless you have the reptilian brain, right? And these, quote, smart guys, and of course at Multiview we don't hire smart people. Why? Because they can't learn. But a lot of these guys that try to cut these razor-thin deals, grind people down to the bone or to the nub, getting every extraction they can out of whoever they're negotiating with, whether it's an employee, whether it's a vendor. The point is, when you have this reptilian brain, you have lopsided deals. And what do we know about all relationships that are unfair or perceived as unfair? They will eventually fail. They will crumble. It is not a sustainable relationship. And so, therefore, it's bad business. You want to arrange all of your agreements, your commitments, your obligations that are fair. You want to be in good standing with everyone, if possible, right? Isn't that intelligent? And as I've alluded to here, we have incentives, we have disincentives. Both have to be brought into really the compensation equation, but there's great value in pain. A lot of people have not reconciled themselves to the fact that we learn so much through pain. Pain says, pay attention to me, fix this. So when, let's say, some compensation is taken away, we have something called the standards pay bucket, where every employee has a certain percentage of their pay, maybe 20% or so, that has to do with just doing your job, with no stretch, no goals, just doing your job to the standards of the organization. Well, if somebody doesn't do the standards, they should feel some pain. They need to normally feel some type of extraction that communicates in that paycheck, hey, I better stop doing that. This hurts. Or if you have the incentive sides, hey, that worked out, I think I'll do more of that. And thus, this is the way the world works. And pain, or the negative aspect of compensation, again, works to our benefit so much because it's good when we're discontented. It's good when we're dissatisfied. It's good when we're broke. Sometimes it's even good when we're ill. All these things bring attention that, hey, maybe we should chart a new course. Maybe we should do something different. Maybe I need to be accountable for my life and get out of the victim game of blaming others for my circumstances. The other thing about compensation, there's always this risk-reward relationship, and it goes to this duality that I keep going back to, that in order to get great reward or compensation, there has to be great risk associated with it, and that's the way it is. So many people don't want to pay the price of success. I don't know how you build a great business or become wealthy doing a 40-hour week. I've just never seen it. Everyone that I know, some of my billionaire friends and the different folks in some of the circles I run in, all of them put in long hours, often 100-hour weeks, where we just drive ourselves towards that vision. Obviously, you don't do that forever because we're protoplasm. Our bodies have to have times of rest and all this. But sometimes you have to be like that Thomas Edison that just keeps going, or that Henry Ford, or that Steve Jobs, or Sam Walton, or Martha Stewart. These people that they call, quote, workaholics. Now, with this said, you get to a certain level of achievement. Normally, you back off a little bit, you enjoy it a little bit more, but you have the satisfaction of knowing that you paid the price. You did the hard work. It was earned. Whereas if you are rewarded richly for not doing the work, you are injured. You get feelings of entitlement, like it was owed to me, and people don't have a good sense of what their true value is. They can't gauge their own self-worth. So this risk and reward, yes, I'm risking my time, I'm risking my money, I'm going in my own savings to make payroll during the rough times, because there's always the valleys. It's not just going towards the mountain. There's the valleys, there's the storms that almost consume you, or the loss of the great employee, or whatever hardship. Hardship is part of it. Life is struggle. That's part of the game of life, is that there's always this resistance element as we're making our way through dense matter, and that's good. And in the natural world, we know that, again, if a muscle is not exercised against resistance, it atrophies. If the mind is not used, it becomes dull and slow. And the same thing applies in this risk-reward or cause and effect relationship. Now, as we talk about compensation, we have to discuss this risk-reward relationship. You might boil it down to, you need people that are going to bet on themselves. They basically bet on their own success, their belief in themselves, and be compensated for that, and also bet on the company. That is the belief in the company that it's going in the right direction, and it's going to be a winner. So it's through compensation that really this risk-reward thing plays out, that people are going to bet on themselves and bet on the company simultaneously. Now let's talk about value. Because money, compensation, is value, whether it's money value, whether it is life value, the environment that we work in. But put bluntly, value is a projection. This is something that we transpose onto life. Again, the crown jewels, yes, they are worth untold millions of dollars. But to a child, they might look at them, play with them for 5 minutes, and then find a cardboard box more entertaining. Value is a projection, right? And, of course, we've got a podcast on the 6 levels of value, and I'm not going to go through all of that, but it has to be taken into account that compensation is value. Again, there's survival value, utility value, economic value, which is what we're talking about mainly, entertainment value, aesthetic value, happiness value, and, of course, those can blur together. But a good grasp of what value is huge. I think it is a big factor of success when you're purchasing properties, when you're building the business, when you're building up relationships. Those smart cookies that can ascertain value, that can see into the future, how things can be developed or cultivated, they've definitely got a leg up over those that just kind of blindly go through things. And those people that can ascertain value obviously have an immense advantage. And as we talk about value, we have to realize that often value comes from pain. Value comes from the price paid. So we talked about nothing is free, right? If we have to pay a large amount or make a big sacrifice, or quote, sacrifice, because in a way you never sacrifice because all is gain. Though you may have discipline or sacrifice along the way, usually the result is some multiple of immense value for whatever you've given. But value comes from pain. It comes from the price paid. And anything that's given or, quote, free, unearned, or is cheap, people don't value those things, right? You know that when you're sick or when you've injured yourself and the amount of effort it takes to rehabilitate an arm, like my guitar arm, from so many hours a day of playing and all of this, you know that you paid a price for that skill. And you know the price that you paid to rehab that. And so therefore, when you're playing after that, you're maybe a little more delicate. Maybe you're a little more conscientious of what you're doing with your body at that time. Yes, because a price has been paid, therefore it has value. Or if you sacrifice building up a property or fixing up the cabin like I did here, yeah, I am endeared to this place because I put something into it. And there's that feeling. Whereas, again, if it's given to you or perceived as cheap, we don't value it. Now, linked to the concept of value is the concept of wealth. And a lot of people don't understand what wealth is. A lot of times we think it's just money in the bank and big bank statements and piles of gold and all that. But true wealth is knowing how to luxuriate in life. That is, to enjoy the moment-by-moment process of life, not so fixated on the destination or the vision, though that is equally important, but really enjoying that ham sandwich or that spaghetti or taking that walk or driving to work in your vehicle. And again, luxuriating. I love that word because that sums up really what wealth is. And I look at it when, like I was furnishing the cabin. Well, rather than put cheap furniture in there, since you're going to spend so much of your time, your life, in this dwelling that you love, why put cheap furniture in? I put the most expensive furniture I could. Fine leather. You feel like you're sitting in luxury. That's understanding wealth. Obviously, there's times where you're purchasing different consumer products and you want the discounted one or the cheaper variety. Why? Because you don't put huge value on it, because you may not use that much of it, or you may use a lot of it, or you want to direct those resources towards some other end. But understanding value, understanding what wealth really is. And in an organizational context, the work environment is probably this aspect of wealth. It is how people know that their lives are being used up, what they are throwing their life away on every day. Is it worth it? Am I enjoying it? And that's a huge aspect of wealth. Also, as we talk about compensation, we have to talk about happiness, because happiness itself is a payoff, right? It's a form of compensation. And I think there's a lot of confusion about happiness. Happiness is not the same as fun. Yes, you can ride the Ferris wheel, and you have fun in the moment, but once that ride is over, it's like, wow, I'm still here. I still got my boyfriend that I'm not that happy with. I still don't like my job. And so this confusion of fun versus true happiness or contentment, I think, needs some clarity. Normally, to really be happy, to really be satisfied and content with our lives, we have to, again, give something. There has to be some sacrifice. There has to be some discipline. For example, when you knock out the advanced degree, or maybe just the degree, or you learn how to do some mechanical skill, or you learn how to play an instrument. These things involve a great number of hours. But when you're done, you step back, you reflect on it, and you have this sense of real satisfaction, real contentment. Whereas if something's given to you, you just don't value it, you don't appreciate it. And so, let's say it like this: the path to happiness involves the negative side. And if you don't incorporate the negative into your compensation system, you are robbing the development of your people. Again, at some level, we have to reconcile the disincentives, the negative aspects of compensation, into our overall plan or design of our comp. Okay? And as I'm laying this groundwork, what is the payoff for studying compensation? And you can find all kinds of books on them. I mean, I've got libraries in all of my houses, really. And you'll find a section devoted to compensation. You'll find a lot of spirituality and all kinds of topics that I'm interested in. But you'll see the academic ones that kind of theorize, this is how you do this. And then you'll find those really practical ones. And of course, so much about compensation is not even written, and I'm always shocked at that. But what is the payoff for studying compensation? Well, first of all, if you want to succeed in any group enterprise, you're going to have the help of others. So therefore, the equation might be this: if I want to succeed, I have to help other people succeed. Okay, it can't just all be for me. And to get what you want, you have to help other people get what they want. So those ideas have to be designed into our comp system. So what is the definition of compensation? It's taken a long time to get to that. Well, it can basically be boiled down to this. It is something of value given in exchange for something else, right? Compensation, a noun, typically money. Money received by an employee from an employer in the form of wages or salary. Boy, they get us into a traditional mindset right off the bat there. Something that counterbalances or makes up for an undesirable or unwelcome state of affairs. Oh my God, there's the positive and negative illustrated all through just a standard definition of compensation. But with this said, we will look at compensation in a much more broad definition, seeing compensation in all of its forms, monetary as well as non-monetary, and even just really the ultimate payoff, which is what? Our feelings. Just feeling good about life. That's probably the ultimate payoff. And another thing about a compensation system is that it creates focus. Great focus. Why? Because I think it goes back to our beginnings, that we kind of get that if we don't get out there and get food, we are going to die. If we don't get shelter, again, a form of compensation or value, that we're going to freeze to death because a human being can only live within a certain range of temperature. We get that. So it almost goes back to our survival instinct, and we all would prefer that we have more nuts than we need, or feel that we have more than adequate amount of nuts stored away in case bad things happen. So obviously we focus on compensation to a huge extent. Now, compensation was the beginning of MVI. Again, I worked in music. I had a major label recording contract, 6-record deal. After a number of years and actually figuring out the financial arrangement, knowing that we were going to have to sell probably 500,000 records just to pay back our advance, well, I breached my contract, said I quit, but obviously I couldn't do anything in a musical context. I couldn't play in a bar legally. I didn't own any images of myself. I didn't even own my songs anymore. So I became a programmer. I taught myself how to program. I became a system analyst. And then I thought, money's probably important. I should learn more about that. So I became a CPA. And I talked my way into a job with a compensation software company. And so I was right in this compensation world right away, and had great success really in developing these comp systems. And these were for textile mills and country clubs and all kinds of different factories and service organizations and things like that. And then when I got in the healthcare field, this naturally followed me. And one day the CEO came into my office and said, "You developed all these comp systems for all these different companies." I said, "Yes, I did." And, well, I need one, and I need it in 2 weeks. And so I put together an activity-based compensation system because I was very much into activity-based costing at the time. And that's one thing. I mean, I was just an expert at being able to cost out anything from a product to a service. Again, here's this fruity, artsy-fartsy guitar player guy discovering that he had a left hemisphere of the brain, which is where the concrete resides. And I would never have known that. All that would have remained dormant except for I had breached that contract. So that negative constraint caused me to go in this much more practical, sequential, logical direction. So I put together this system, and what happened? We had 100% increase in productivity. We had 100% increase in quality. Issues were solved almost overnight or within one payroll run, because people got their paycheck and go, they're serious. Now, we had a great rollout at the time because, again, I had experience doing that. And then I found myself on the national stage in front of 2,000 people at the national trade event in Washington, D.C. And I gave my presentation, and people hated it. I mean, I was being booed. I was making, in this case, the hospice world, they perceived me as Satan. So again, if I wear black, it's because I have issues. But the point is, we had this huge success. And there's those other organizations that were a little more humble in the crowd that said, Andrew has something here. And then they got these miraculous results. So compensation was the beginning of Multiview Incorporated, or MVI. And so since then, we put in hundreds of compensation systems, and they have evolved over the years. And the thing that you will find is that you will always be evolving your comp systems. I just wrote an article to CEOs and CFOs saying, where should CFOs spend most of their time? Well, people development is probably the number one thing, because we're in human organizations serving humans. We better understand human. And then the second thing is the comp systems, providing the incentives and the disincentives for the workforce. Getting very clear on the results we want and how are we going to make that happen. And it all, of course, has to be based on reality. And thus we have Multiview Incorporated, almost encapsulated in that. A lot of times people think of us only as financial gurus. I mean, we have achieved incredible economic results for ourselves and for our clients, but it all is going to come from this focus on the true assets and liabilities of an organization, which are its people. Our true assets and liabilities are walking in the halls. They are working on the shop floor. And so we have to design our systems intelligently for this. And again, it's a win-win. We want it for the benefit of the employee. We want it for the benefit of us. We want it for the benefit even of our vendors and partners that make everything possible. But all of this ecosystem has to work together, and it works together through the transactional network of the comp system and compensation in all of its forms.
Thank you for listening. If you need anything further, just go to mvi.life.